correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience.
Welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, the show where me and my friend Steve here talk RPGs. How's it going, Steve?
Hey, Steve!
So, first things first, let's talk about our show of the week. And our show of the week is Shared Sagas, who's currently playing Star Wars RPG.
Indeed they are.
Tell me a little bit about Shared Sagas there, Steve.
Well, they are a bunch of Aussies who get together and play games. And they've done a bunch of different stuff. I know they did a little bit of D&D, they did some Shadowrun, but currently they've got kind of a longer campaign of Star Wars going, and quite a lot of fun to listen to. I'm a bit behind because I listen to entirely too many podcasts at this point in my life, but they're quite a fun bunch. And if you're looking for them, you can find them at sharedsagas.podbean.com.
Yeah. So, our topic for the week is when to roll dice. And I think it's an interesting topic because a system that we both have a fondness for does this really well, and a system we both have mild disdain for, I wouldn't say disdain, but mild uncomfortableness for, does this very horribly.
Yeah, I think some of that is also its heritage of play. It doesn't have to be done that way, but that's the way it's been done, and so people continue to think that way.
Yeah, I know it's, how do I put this? I know it's heritage of play, but it's also in the rules. And I know, obviously, not to beat around the bush, we're talking about D&D again, just real quick. But I know it's in the rules of when to roll dice and all of that. I know we always talk about the rule of cool, but when it comes to stuff like that, it feels like especially people who are maybe newer to the system, or even some more experienced people, want those dice rolls to be decisive rather than being decisive or making a decision themselves. And I think, in my personal opinion, I've stolen this from multiple people, but the main person that I took inspiration from was GM Chris, who said only make dice rolls when it is either beneficial or can cause terrible damage to the party. Meaning that I'm only going to want to roll dice on like a perception check if it means that I miss some huge thing or I get to see something really important.
Mm-hmm. I think, as I remembered, he said basically only roll dice if the failure is interesting or something along those lines. It sounds, that's what sticks in my head. But yeah, but that goes into a little bit too. Yeah, you don't want to just you don't need to roll for everything, right? Because let's be honest, there's the concept that I've heard it named is presumed competence. And to me, what that means is essentially that your characters in a game are, look, they're investigators, they're adventurers, whatever. They are actually good at what they do.
Well, yeah. And I think the other thing, and this is something maybe we'll get into a little deeper later, but presumed competence that grows as you play. So especially in a game with like a level system, or in the case of Genesis, where you have experience points, the later in the game, the less necessary it is for you to do rolls on minor things because you are competent at this point. You've learned what to look out for, and you've learned, like I might make a streetwise check early in the game that I don't need to make that same streetwise check later because I know that slang, or, I've acquired that skill. My skills have gotten bigger, better, more powerful.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that, not to keep harping on Dungeons and Dragons, because we do harp on it a lot, but that's something that Dungeons and Dragons, especially your rules as written, kind of misses. Is that the later in the game, the less necessary it is for you to do an insight check on somebody when you know somebody's lying to you. It's maybe it's less necessary for you to do a perception check because your passive perception should be a lot higher at this point. You should be a little bit more able to read and understand a situation.
Well, see, I think that is something that they've implemented is the concept of passive checks that is really intended to cut down on the unnecessary rolls. And the only one kind of basically written in is passive perception, but you could do that with any skill.
Yeah, you could absolutely do it with any skill, but the fact that they just wrote it in for passive perception is kind of, I don't know, maybe telling, in my opinion, that they think it's more about like, they think, like a lockpick check should not be, like to pick locks should not be as difficult later on in the game unless it's like obviously more difficult lock, but if I'm just like opening a house door, that's the same difficulty now as it was back when we first started. The only difference is that back when we first started, I wasn't as experienced in opening house doors. You know what I mean?
Right.
I've opened, I've worked and opened harder doors at this point. Now it's time that if I go to pick a lock, well, I should be able to just do it.
That also plays into and this is something that you'll hear people talk about it, and I swear it's probably generated almost as many arguments around tables as anything else, but as written, I do not believe there are critical fails or critical success on skill checks in Dungeons and
There are not.
Dragons.
No, rules as written does not have critical success or critical failure on skill checks. And personally, I like critical failures and critical successes, especially on skill checks, because sometimes you can do a thing so horribly or so well that it is either funny or super beneficial to the party or beneficial to the game in some way,
Yeah.
but it's just dumb luck. It's just that like, oh, I just lucked into this, now it works. And that's where I think Genesis really does that well, because you have the triumphs and you have the despair. And I look at those as like there are criticals in Genesis, but I look at triumph and despair as your criticals, as your critical success, as your critical failure. Your despair is going to be your critical failure. You failed so hard that something bad has to happen.
Yeah. It's not exactly that, but it is sort of that in a way too.
Yeah, it's not necessarily like you can succeed and still acquire a despair, but I kind of look at them in that sense of, yeah, I just look at it like in the sense of Genesis has despair and has that triumph where, you can fail upward and you can fail downwards. Like,
Yeah. Well, I think it's worth noting too, though, and this is getting into a little bit of the mechanics of games, but Genesis and one of my personal favorite systems, Delta Green, your crit or, however you want to view them and as far as triumphs, etc. in Genesis, but your crit scale with your ability in those systems. And Dungeons and Dragons does not do that. It's a 5% chance either way, unless you have some special feat, blah, 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 that then makes it 10%
yeah,
for success.
it Dungeons and Dragons is a very binary system.
Yes.
And I think you see that in a lot of D20 systems. And I like D20 systems. I like D100 systems. And personally, at this point, I've come to the point in my life where I'm more inclined to like a D100 system better.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, I don't know, there's something about.
There's something about a really nice D20 system, but I really like a nice D100 system a little bit more than a D20 system. It doesn't feel, we've talked about like swingy, which is a hard thing to quantify, but D20 feels really binary, really yes or no in a lot of cases. And D100 systems feel like degrees of failure or degrees of success in most cases.
I think maybe it is because you're on a fixed scale where with D20 you're going for a target number in most, your classic F20s, D&D, Pathfinder, etc. You're going for, okay, my target number is this, but it's yes, there's bounded accuracy and all that stuff, but it's not that, your target number, like there's an OSR game out there called Warlock,
Mhm.
which
Phenomenal,
is
by the way.
it's a I haven't picked it up yet, but I've heard it played, and I really like it as kind of a simple, lightweight fantasy
Let me
engine.
guess. Wait, I'm gonna do something weird. I'm gonna shout out a podcast that's not on the network. Let me guess where you heard that played. You heard that played on Mud and Blood. I
Yes,
love that
indeed.
show.
They're very good. They interviewed the creator as well and I believe they did a review of the
They did.
game as
Yep.
well. But one thing that the guy that wrote that, I believe his name's Greg Sanders or
Mhm.
Saunders or anyway, he built it as a D20 system that mimics a D100 system.
Okay. Yeah, that's
And he did that by your target number is always 20.
mhm.
You add your skill, whatever, your die roll, and you're trying to beat 20. Well, 5 times 20 is 100.
Right.
So it's a D100 system, but played with a D20. But in the case of like Dungeons and Dragons, where say you're trying to hit something that's armor class is 13, well, it
It's either you do or you don't. I mean, if you go over that, technically, yeah, there is with combat, there is that crit success thing. But it's very much like, in my opinion, especially in combat and D&D, it's do you hit an armor class 13? Yes or no? If the answer is no, okay, cool, we move on. If the answer is yes, all right, then we move on to combat. It's not a sense of no, I have like with a D100 system, you do have that chance of like, okay, your range is 13 is the target number. Well, that's really easy. So what degree of success do I get? And that's more of where I like my D100 systems is what degrees of success am I succeeding at? You know, I'm rolling a 100 and my target number is 50 and I roll a 55. Okay, what does that entail? I hit my target number, I go just over it. What does that entail? I think that's where, when rolling dice, I prefer D100 systems because it seems like you have the chance for granularity both in success and failure. I need a 50, but I rolled a 49. Well, I almost got there. So when the GM's describing what happens, you have a better idea of where your failure point was. You know what I mean? Like, I'm
yeah.
scaling a building and not necessarily that it's like life or death, but I'm scaling a building and I go to grab for my next handhold and I roll a 48 and I needed a 50. Just means that my hand slips and maybe I didn't make the handhold, but I'm on the next platform down, or maybe the DM's nice and I just made that handhold, but my hand still slipped and now I'm in more of a precarious position than I was.
Yeah. Most D100 systems are roll under, not roll over, but
Right. And occasionally you have those target number D100 systems. But the roll under systems is even more of that, like roll under a 30. Okay. Well, that tells me a lot too. You know what I mean?
well, I think it processes quicker in the mind for most people because you look at, okay, my skill is 45%. So I have a 45% chance of success.
Yeah.
It's that simple. So you rolled a 47, you just barely didn't
Hmm.
get it. You know what I mean? And while you could narrate that out with D&D or whatever,
It just doesn't hit quite the same way.
it doesn't click in at least my brain as fast.
No, like if you tell me roll a D20 or roll a D100 and roll under, roll a D100 and it's a 30% chance of success or a 40% chance of success. Okay, and I roll, I roll over that. All right, well now I know that, I failed that and I know what degree I failed that at. But you tell me I rolled a 13 on a D20 and I'm going to look at you and go, what's that mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But I think we're kind of getting into the weeds
yeah, well,
a little bit, but it's us, so we do that.
this is the first time me and you have sat down to record a podcast together in a while. Deal with it.
This is true. But I mean, like the concept of, the presumed competence is essentially that if it's something pretty simple, like yeah, like it's something it's you just do the characters notice the thing sitting on the desk? Well, let's see. You've got a private detective, a police officer, and a mercenary. Well, these are all people who pretty much part of their job Part of the reason they can stay alive at their job is because they notice things. So, thing is sitting on the desk, there's a good chance they're just going to notice it. You don't need to make them roll for everything because, and this is an issue I've personally run into at times, is every now and then you get those situations where you need them to find something, and if you make them roll, they can fail. And then if everyone fails, now they don't have the thing they need.
Well, I think my thing is that if you have, say, a private detective and a cop or whatever, and they're searching the room and one of them goes, "I searched the desk," well, then now you know, okay, well, that's the private detective. Of course he's going to search the desk. Once he starts searching the desk, well, you find this, 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 and this. You don't have to make them roll to find it because it doesn't make any sense to make them roll to find it. You know, like it's one of my issues with D&D is that like, well, I want to search that chest or I want to search this. Okay, give me a D20. All right. And you roll it and then it's like, well, you find this, 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 and this, but you didn't find the puzzle piece you were looking for. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
I just tore that thing apart. I was looking for it. I'm especially at higher levels. It's like I'm not new to this,
Yeah. Now, one thing I would suggest, and it's come to my mind, is a way because I think too there's an element where rolling dice, at least for some players, helps them feel involved, makes them feel like they're actually affecting the story as opposed to the GM just narrating it.
I think it depends on the kind of game and the type of player you are.
I would tend to agree. Yeah.
I'm not arguing with you, but I'm just in my mind, I think if you're more of a role player, and we go back and listen to our episode on player types, but if you're more of a role player, maybe you don't necessarily need to roll dice constantly to stay involved.
Right.
Like I like to roll dice at least. I like to roll dice at least once or twice a game. I don't mind it so much. Like I don't need to be rolling dice every 2 seconds. I just don't.
Right. But a thought that has come to my mind to use is okay, so you're going to have them find it, but you have them roll to see how quickly they find it or if maybe they find something extra, and okay, maybe you have to make up the extra off the top of your head. But, you know, it goes back to, like in the classic D&D rules, you're supposed to roll what is it, every 5 or 10 feet of a tunnel if you're checking for
Yeah.
traps? Well, look, I mean, that's tedious and boring and time consuming. And unless it's just an evil dungeon, there's going to be a lot of those rolls that aren't going to turn up anything because there's nothing there to find.
Well, and I played in a game where somebody had me roll a bunch of my checks up front. They were like, "All right, you're entering the dungeon. Go ahead and roll your checks up front and write them down." And it's like, okay, well, this is not like it's a little bit better because then you're not rolling dice every 2 seconds. But the fact of it is that rules is written for dungeoneering and D&D for a game called Dungeons and Dragons is kind of abysmal.
It gets sloggy. And there comes a point too where like you said, is if you've gone up in levels and so forth, and this character has been climbing through dungeons for the last several years or several months or whatever, they're going to have a sense of what to look for, where a trap would likely be, etc. So it does make sense to not have them roll every time. And there's also the idea of if you have a player roll something, they think that there's something there to find. If you call for a roll and they fail, in a lot of players' minds, that means, oh, we missed something. And so now you got the rest of the table trying to find it, or they start metagaming. And it's a human thing, right? I'm not trying to say it's wrong, but again, it starts slogging things down.
Yeah. It's just part of life. Like it's just now we're gonna be like, hey guys, there's something here because God told me to roll dice. Like God told me to roll extra dice.
Yeah.
Which if I was a paladin,
Go back to my halfling that thinks he's a paladin for second
yeah.
edition D&D.
If I was a paladin, it would be like, God told me to roll more dice. Wait, what? Yeah, I gotta roll dice. Hold on.
But like it's a weird balance to strike, right? Because, on some level, you don't wanna just narrate everything, but it's a thing you just I think you have to learn for your table too, right? Like
That's another thing, you gotta feel it out for the table that you're playing with,
yeah.
whatever. I don't know. Words don't fail me now. Um, it's one of those things where you have to feel it out for your table and you have to be able to get an idea of what your table wants. If your table wants to play where you're rolling dice constantly, okay, I guess we're going to be rolling dice constantly. And if you don't like that style of play, maybe you're not, maybe you shouldn't be the one running that game.
Yeah. Well, I used to listen to a podcast, it was D&D podcast, and their whole shtick was that they would try to roll because, their shtick was the failures. They were fishing for those nat
Mhm.
ones. And that was their bit, and that was what they did, you know what I mean? That was their brand. And so, yeah, they're gonna do that a lot, but at the same time, if you're going for a more serious toned game, you want it to be more immersive, to a certain point, constant die rolling is gonna break that immersion as opposed to just the back and forth of narration between the GM and the players, and, "Well, I'm gonna go over here and poke around at this thing," or, like you said, "I'm gonna go check the desk." Well, yeah, you're a private detective. You know how to turn a desk out and look for
Well,
things.
it's assumed that you can, you're a private detective. You're going to pull a couple drawers and you're going to try and get that thing inside, outside, and backwards.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, that comes to and to a certain point, this hits especially heavy if you're running a more investigation-based game, because then you need the players to find clues, but in having them roll, like I said, and, this happened to me when I was running, I ran a one shot of Delta Green for a bunch of people on the Discord, and I had a situation where I had them all roll. I forget what it's called, search or notice, I think. I don't remember now off the top of my head what the name of the skill is, and every single one of them failed. And now I'm like, "Well, crap. What do I do now?" You know what I mean? Like, so there's a point where and I was doing that because I wanted to get people involved, have them roll dice, but at the same point, I kind of bit myself in the foot too because now they all failed. Well, how do I get them the thing that they need to progress?
Yeah. And that's a difficult thing. Or sometimes you just go, maybe you don't progress.
Yeah, yeah, there's that too. I mean, but that generally leads to everyone being frustrated.
Yeah, but there's ways to play that where it's non-progression. I don't know. I think in my mind there's ways of playing where maybe you don't progress.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying though. Like sometimes hitting that wall is a thing, and it depends too. Like in that case it was a one shot, so I didn't have the
Luxury,
okay,
yeah.
we'll come back to this later element of it. If it's a more of a campaign style game, yeah, you could do that. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff out there too for running investigative stuff. I know Seth Skorkowski has done a few episodes of his YouTube channel on it, which go check his stuff out because it's really good. But anyway, yeah, but like I think rolling dice, for as much as we talk about it in the hobby, is something that maybe you want to think a little more before you just have people roll all the time for everything, you know?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think rolling dice is one of those things that we take it for granted, and at the same time, the people that know, people like GM Chris that know about tricks and stuff like that, sometimes that doesn't get passed along to the newer players. You know what I mean? Or the people that are less experienced, or you know, the people that are new to systems, or even people that are just used to reading what the book says and sort of going off that. Some of that information doesn't get passed along. Like that was the first time I had heard of that or thought about it, and I was like, oh, that's brilliant, that's genius, you're absolutely right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and I think, it's been a while since I've listened to that episode, but I think the meat of his comment was essentially that don't have them roll if the only good thing that can happen is they find the thing, and if they don't find the thing, now they're standing there twiddling their thumbs.
Yeah, don't have frivolous roles.
Don't have them make a roll that, for lack of that failure isn't interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and failure being interesting is something that's a player engagement thing that helps keeping your players involved. That helps keep players at the table. Like if you can't keep your players engaged and keep it interesting, they're gonna like not that everybody's gonna leave you, but like players will move on. They'll find other games to play, or there's a lot of games to play out there, and if you can't keep your players engaged, it gets a little difficult. Like I've had trouble with just the wrong play group keeping them engaged at the table. And so, you just have to that's one of those things that you have to play it by ear. And you have to work with the players that are at your table and know what they're looking for and communicate. We talk about communication a lot, and it's really important. It's really important that you communicate between your players and everybody.
Yeah. Communication is I mean, look, it's the core of playing these games is communicating back and forth. But even more than that, it's before you start playing, having a dialogue about, look, this is what I'm going for. This is how I want to run things. You know, I'm going to assume that your characters are competent and that you can, some of these things, I'm just going to say you did the thing as opposed to making you roll because then we can keep going.
Yeah, we can keep the game moving. We don't have to stop for 10 minutes while you roll dice and figure out what the number is. And that's not disparaging anybody who has difficulties like myself. I have difficulties doing math quickly, but it's more of a to keep the pacing of the game, we're just going to roll dice. We're going to roll dice again, or we're just going to say that this isn't that important. You don't have to roll dice for this check. You can succeed without having to roll dice for it.
Yeah. And I think, like Genesis does that, because of the way the dice pool builds and everything, it helps you modify the stakes a little more clearly. It is, having played it at least more now, it is a different kind of way of thinking about things. But you almost always have something happen on the die roll. And that's where I think, like Powered by the Apocalypse, which I'm not terribly familiar with. I haven't ever gotten a chance to play any of it, but their system is set up so that something always happens when you roll dice. Good, bad, or partially either way. It's not just, oh, you didn't do the thing next, which I think is what we're really trying to say you want to avoid is, no, you didn't do it. What now?
Yeah. Yeah, it's PBTA. I really need to read it and get it Powered by the Apocalypse game. I know there's a couple people in our Discord that really like that system, and I never want to disparage it. I've just never touched it. I know there's a lot of people in the community that are like, oh, everything's powered by the apocalypse. But at the same time, I've never grabbed a game that's powered by the apocalypse. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I have a couple, but I haven't actually read them yet.
Yeah, I want to know. Like, I know that's sort of Powered by the Apocalypse is sort of I don't want to say catch-all term. It's sort of an engine for games in a way.
Yeah, kind of a design framework.
Yeah, that's more of what I was looking for. Less of an engine and more of a framework, because there's a number of PBTA games that are radically different from each other.
Oh, yeah, very much. And on the subject of PBTA, to digress for a minute, have you, Steve, paid attention to the recently launched Avatar Kickstarter?
Yes, I have. It's going ham.
It set a new record for an RPG-based Kickstarter in, like, the first 2.5 days.
Mhm.
The old record, I think, was what, Matt Colville, when just over 2 million, and right now, literally a week into the campaign, they're sitting at
23 days to go. $4,199 and 700 $4,199,760
yeah.
of a goal of $50,000.
Yes. Yes. And that's a Powered by the Apocalypse game. That's from Magpie, and that's what they've done a bunch of stuff. I know, yeah, they've got a bunch of games out.
I mean, Magpie.
Yeah.
It's the name says it all.
But, yeah, that has gone berserk.
Well, and the fact of it is that any stretch goal any stretch goal that they set has now been crushed. Congratulations.
Yeah. Well, I had heard, and I haven't looked at that far down, but I had heard they literally ran out of stretch goals.
I would imagine at $4 million, they probably did.
I'm gonna scroll down here.
New NPCs. I'm looking.
Yeah, the last one listed as we're recording.
Yeah, it's $4 million. So they broke that. So they're out of stretch goals. Hey, guess what? Game's funded. If you want to go get they got some cool stuff.
Yeah.
Like the game's funded, but I would be tempted to even throw money at this. Like,
well, I'll be completely
even at the $120 at the 120 level, there's some really nice stuff here. The dice bags, digital rewards, all the books.
Is that the is that the special edition cover too? Or is that the next one
no,
up?
that's retailers only. Let's take a look here.
The $100 one, I think it's the special cover.
Special cover, yep. All stretch goals. Yeah, $100 level does that.
Yeah. So I mean it, and I will say, it's something I've been kind of working on. I've been wanting to get somebody on because we do these system overview shows. I've been working to try and get some people on to talk about Power by the Apocalypse. So I may have to redouble my efforts and see if I can't get somebody to come talk about this, because it's it's a force in the industry.
Yeah. Well, I don't have too much more to say about rolling dice.
Like I said, sometimes, for as much as dice are a big part of playing these games, sometimes it might work better if maybe you put down the dice more.
Yeah.
Well, with that then, do we want to do game of the week, or do we have anything else you want to talk about before that?
No, I think we'll move on to game of the week.
All right. Game of the week.
Game of the week. Game of the week.
You go first, or am I going first?
I'll go first. I have a weird one.
A weird game?
No, really. Mine is all right, because I love what it does to my brain. It's called Dead Ball, and you've probably seen it on drive-through. I know I've seen it a couple times on drive-through. It is baseball with dice. The whole point of the game is to play baseball. It's for one or two players to bring like a realistic baseball ballpark tabletop game. And I like the idea of, and I hadn't really thought about it. It's a segment of the community that I hadn't really put much thought into. I like the idea of sports tabletop RPGs where you're simulating playing a sport. I wouldn't necessarily do it for a long time, but maybe once in a while, something weird to throw on a table. I think that would be fun. It's just baseball. It's just baseball. It's nothing. It's not like, oh man, it's baseball, but in the future. No, it's baseball.
Well, but you could also use it to play a mini game within the game you're playing if you wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah, you could use it to run baseball inside of another game. Or yeah, I just think it's a neat idea of like in the like video gaming community, sports games are pretty common. In tabletop, sports games are kind of uncommon.
Yeah, that's true.
And I like the idea of that here's a sports simulation game in tabletop form.
Yeah, I'd never seen this before. This does look interesting.
As you look at it, it's just baseball. It's like,
yeah. That's neat. There's a couple of bundles and
yeah, the core book is pay what you want.
Yeah. And there's a quick start. It's
free. Yeah. The quick start is what they describe as actually free, and
that's neat.
It looks like it's aimed more towards playing like the artwork and stuff suggests more of an old, like original baseball of like early 1900s type, but yeah, it's just neat. It's just interesting.
Yeah, no, that does look different and unique.
What do you got?
Well, I was digging around and I found one that, well, I don't know how many of us actually play this just ourselves, although, well, let's be honest, you and I would, because I think we would get ourselves in a lot of trouble with this. But I found a game, and I think it's something that we probably have some listeners that might be interested in it, because well, I'll tell you the name first. It's called Little Monster Detectives.
Okay, you have my attention.
Now, I will read the beginning of the listing on drive-through. This is no ordinary book. There are monsters inside. Yes, you got that right. Monsters exist and live with us. Don't be afraid. They aren't bad. At least not entirely. Have you ever noticed that you might be missing socks or that you hear strange noises in the dead of night? You aren't absent-minded, nor do the pipelines make noise. They're the monsters of darkness. But don't panic, because there are brave detectives whose job it is to catch them so they will stop bothering you. They are none other than the monster detectives.
Hmm, that's cute.
What this is actually a game designed for kids.
Yeah.
It's designed for kids starting at age 5.
Okay. I can respect that. Like I like a game designed for children because it's accessible.
Yeah, and so, yeah, it's and okay, I remember as a young child, my parents got me a copy of it was a Sesame Street book, and some of you may remember this. It was called There's a Monster at the End of This Book,
Yep. Yep, I had it.
and I actually remember being scared the first time they read it to me.
Yeah, but for little kids, that would be a lot of fun. If it's keep it lighthearted, keep it whimsical and silly, and even like as an adult, I'm excited to play something like that because it's fun and whimsical and lighthearted, and you get wrapped up in those games that are so dire and dark and serious and taking themselves seriously, and it's like, that's fine. It's good for when you want to do that, but at the same time, I want a game that, if I shut my brain off, or even something that's stimulating but not like grim and dark and gritty, and
Yeah.
more of just like, here's a silly game about finding monsters that are stealing socks, or
Yeah, like and I know we've got listeners that, have younger kids or maybe, I might even have a couple that have grandkids, you know what I mean, whatever. And let's be honest, most of us that play these games, there's a little bit of kid at heart to us. So, I have a feeling this is something that you could very easily play with 3 adults and a couple kids or all adults if you really wanted to because, well, let's be honest, we all like to make up silly stuff.
yeah,
But
that's why we play it in the hobby we play it.
well, but I've mentioned it before, Alex Thomas, who did the Mutants and Masterminds things with us,
Mhm.
his, organization, that's called the Untold Stories Project, they put out a podcast that's called Something Something Dragons, and that is one of the people in the organization, it's their early teen daughter and a bunch of her friends, and they happen to be playing Pathfinder, but I've listened to a few episodes of it, and it's really, really neat to hear the way they play the game because I don't know how to describe it other than just like there's this kind of innocent imagination to it that is often very lacking when we as adults all play these games. We're all thinking about, well, what's the best way to kill the monster? And they'll be thinking, well, yeah, but if I do this, I'll get gook on my shoes, and I don't want to do that. And it's like I said, it's just refreshing to hear that, and it feels like this game would really, really capture that, and it is written to play with kids, and there's even a thing it mentions, further on down the listing where it's designed for even, like, if you've got one older child or whatever, that it's designed for them to be able to run the game too it has different kind of levels of rules and mechanics. So, and it flat out says it's designed, to be able to kind of bend and flex it to deal with shorter attention spans or, younger children who are still really learning their numbers. So, like I said, I'm having to, half of a mind to spend the $15 to get this just because it could be fun just to play with, be it you or whoever.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think it's cute and fun and sounds like a good time.
You know what else is coming up, Steve?
What's that?
Another episode or two. This will be a whole darn year we've done this thing.
I know, that's crazy, isn't it? It's like we're coming up on, yeah, you're right. By the time this one airs,
I think this episode will be our 51st week because I know we had that one little bonus episode we released midweek.
scrolling down. Yeah, September 9th was our original release date.
So yeah,
We're coming up on it 1 month from now.
Yeah, 1 month from as we record. So I guess if any of y'all have any crazy ideas that we should do for
I have a
our
crazy idea, Steve.
you have a crazy idea?
I do. I think every year we re-record our first episode.
God, that means I gotta go back and listen to it again.
No. We just it's the idea of it was session 0. We just it's a new episode every time, but it's the same topic every year.
Okay. We could do something like that.
But
Oh, my.
all right, well, remind everybody get out there and check out our Discord, check out our Facebook. All that stuff is in the show notes. Please come hang out in our Discord. I am in there to talk to you people more than you realize. I may not type and communicate in like the written means, but I'm constantly, this recently, especially been sitting and just going into general chat and come talk to me. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So,
But yeah, I mean, and I'm constantly checking it
well, you're
much more than I
constantly
really should.
answering
But
in written.
well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, for someone whose thumbs are half the size of a phone screen, I managed to type a decent amount.
You do type a lot in our Discord. But with that, we want to remind everybody to be kind to one another and get out there and play some RPGs.
Take care, y'all.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter and RPGs. Find us on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast. On Discord at Me and Steve RPGs. And as always, all of these links are in the show notes. Thank you, and be kind to one another.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.
I'm getting there. Hold on. Edit this out. Don't leave it in. If we hear it in there, I'm leaving the podcast.